All right, ladies and gentlemen. We got a video here. It's called Trans versus Conservative Women. Are periods essential to womanhood? Question mark. I'm assuming what they really mean is like progressive trans women versus conservative cisgender women. Because trans women, like Blair White would probably agree with the conservative people. It just goes to show you guys, we're not all just one identity, right? Trans people aren't just trans. Women aren't just women. Men aren't just the best. There's more to us. There's more to us that meets the eye. Okay. But yeah, I'm kind of curious about it. When it comes to periods, that's the question. Are periods essential to womanhood? I feel like there's going to be more questions than that, but I just feel like no. Women are, like, if you think about it, like, just remove trans people from the equation for right now. Women are more than just having a period. Like, women are very intelligent. Like, they're able to do a lot of things that men can do. They're very compassionate from a more, I guess you'd say, feminine perspective. Listen, not to be that guy, my wife, very intelligent, somebody who's very motivating, somebody who motivates me to provide. I'm a provider, but she motivates me to provide more. She's very ambitious. She has her own job, et cetera, et cetera. Women are more than just periods. If she couldn't have a period, she'd still be a woman. So I don't think that periods are fundamental to being a woman. Let's get this started.
Okay, so if I were a white person and I said I want to transition into a black person, and I'm redefining what blackness is to fit what I view it as, right? Would you consider that appropriation?
I consider that dodging, and I consider that comparing apples to oranges because race and gender identity are two separate different things.
I completely agree. Honestly, all jokes aside, like, I'm not even going to meme. That's 100% true. Listen, race and sex are very different things, and you agree with me, right? Think about it this way, for people who go to that angle, okay? Do you think that black and white people are fundamentally different? I'd say no. There might be some differences. Like, for instance, I can't go into the sun for too long, right? And I guess a black person can't take out a loan. That's our only difference. I'm just kidding. All jokes aside, there's no difference between white and black people, right? But men and women are very different. And so these things are very different. And there is such thing as transracial, for people who don't know. But it's not like transgender people. It's more of people who are adopted or live in an area that's very predominant, like one race. So, like, for instance, if like a white kid was adopted by like black parents, they might be transracial in some capacity, because they would grow up in like a particular culture that would be different from what is considered like their culture or whatever. That's what it is. But it's not nearly as deep psychologically as gender dysphoria is for transgender people. So we should recognize the difference, because it is really a deflection conversation. It's not; they aren't comparable in the same way at all. Wow. Really epic music.
Step forward if you agree. The transgender movement is indoctrinating our youth.
Indoctrinating our youth? Interesting question. I'm going to turn myself down a little bit. No, it's not. Here's the thing. Because it's more normalized, you're seeing young people get introduced to it more, which I don't think is a problem. I will say that there does seem to be certain aspects of it that might be a little problematic, but not because of trans people, but because kids are annoying. Like, for instance, when I was in school, and I feel like I see this, more and more. When I was in school, I was a dumb nerd, like a metalhead. I love metal. New metal is cringe. That was like annoying. I was over-identifying with something to make me feel special. I feel like there are some people who aren't actually trans who pretend to be. In schools, it's like a trend thing. They'll probably grow out of it because they're not actually trans in any real capacity. That's pretty much it. The issue where I guess you'd come in is if you have parents who are irresponsible. The way I think you should raise any kid is as, quote unquote, not to be, and this isn't meant to be, it's gonna rude or anything, but as normal as possible, right? So if I had a boy, I'd raise him like a boy. Very simple. He's not going to explode and die. Now, as he gets older, if he starts to express that he may not be a boy, we'll deal with that in time. We'll go to the therapist, the doctor, and figure everything out from there and see if maybe they will have gender dysphoria. Hope not, because that'll be a big struggle to deal with. Or maybe they have something else that they're, some other kind of a self-esteem issue that they're identifying as non-binary for when they may not actually be non-binary. I feel like there might be some people like that as well, misdiagnosing themselves as like a gender issue when they might actually just have like a significant issue with, for instance, being a woman that's so sexualized. So I feel like it's more and more young girls are identifying as non-binary. Maybe it's because they feel like beauty standards are so like in their fucking face every day on social media that they're like, I don't want to be a girl anymore. Like they associate the hypersexualization online with being a girl. And so like a lot of young girls might just be like, I'm not binary. I don't want to be a girl. I don't want to like sexualize myself. I feel like that's possible. I feel like that might be a real thing. I don't know. That's just a thought. But I don't know if I would say indoctrinating, unless you're raising your kid like, no, choose your gender. That's insane. You shouldn't do that. You know, that's just fucking preposterous. You know, it's one thing to identify an issue and be able and help your child through that. It's another thing to be like, no, you should be. Because some parents, and not a lot, but there's some like woke. They're like, I want my kid to be trans. It'd be so fucking cool. They get to brag about it. I don't know why you'd want to brag about that. Because that's a significant struggle. But new boss.
We are seeing, especially on social media, on TikTok, you're seeing a lot of people in this community really just targeting children, and you're seeing drag shows, even in conservative states like Texas, and even just media, movies, like it seems like everything seems to be targeted at these kids. You have
well, I'll say like the drag shows for kids are weird, but that's the parents' fault. They shouldn't be bringing them there. As far as like introducing gay and trans shit into movies, like who cares? Like it's a fucking movie that wants representation, like that is just trying to be more representative of trans people.
a drag story hour for kids, and it's just really, I think, predatory in a way. And I'm not saying every
It's not
trans person
predatory.
is doing this, but as a whole, there does seem to be a route that they're taking. Drag story hour for kids. It seems like everything seems to be targeted at these kids. You have drag story hour for kids.
Yeah, again, that's a parent issue. Don't have your don't
And
let
a
your
lot
kid
of
go.
people in this community really just targeting children, and you're seeing
I'm not seeing how it's being targeting
movement
children. Hold
is
on.
indoctrinating our youth.
I'm having a problem with the wording. Like, I'm not going to let my kid go to a drag story time. I'm sorry. And I'm not going to let my kid go to a fucking drag club or whatever. But I wouldn't call it indoctrinating. I think that that's probably trans people who are like, oh, when I was a kid, or excuse me, that's not even trans people. Like, drag shit isn't even trans people. That's for fucking gay people. Those are two completely separate things. But like to me, like a drag show, when you have like drag performers, like the gay guys who dress up in drag and do things like they'll have like a drag show for kids. I don't think that they're being predatory. I think that they're like, oh, when I was a kid, I wanted to do this too. Maybe I'll share that experience with these kids. I think it's weird. I wouldn't want to bring my kid there. But I don't think there's any there's no predatory nature there. I think it's, to me, it would be just like an ignorant thing. Like, I just don't think it's appropriate. But you take your fucking kid there, like, God bless you, whatever. As far as drag shows, like, historically are never been sexualized. It's very recent because our music has become more sexualized. Drag people, people who do drag shows, they're dressing up like usually women that are doing music, like Aretha Franklin. Back in the day, that wasn't sexual, right? But now, like, what do we got here? We got people fucking shaking their asshole. So they're dressing up like those, and it just comes with the territory, unfortunately. What I will say is we're more concerned with young boys going to a drag show where men are dressing like over-sexualized women, but we're not too concerned about bringing people to concerts where the girls are just over-sexualized women. So like it feels like we only care because it's like there's a gayness attached to it. I feel like it's all kind of an issue. We're a little bit too sexual as a society, in my opinion. We should kind of call out both of them. It's a little crazy, but
we are seeing, even you're seeing drag shows, even in conservative states like Texas, and even just media, movies, like it seems like everything seems to be targeted at.
Media and movies doesn't matter to me. The drag shows I get and the story hours I get it. The media, that's just putting stuff in movies. It's really not that deep.
I think predatory in a way, and I'm not saying
not predatory at
every
all.
trans person is doing this, but as a whole, there does seem to be a route that they're taking to get to the kids.
When you hear Blues Clues playing in the next room, and then you hear the Gay Parade song.
Who cares?
It's Blues Clues. You're not expecting to be talking to the children about that. It really makes you wonder, are they really coming for the children?
And I think we see
Coming for the children. If anything, your argument would be like they're like people are being a little too. It's adults putting it in there, and they're like woke. Maybe they're virtue signaling, but they're not coming for the children. I mean, holy fuck.
in our population now, the rate of young children who are identifying as transgender, non-binary is skyrocketing. And I think there's something to be
So I just need you to be very explicitly clear. She's not correct necessarily. She is, but she's not. So the rate of people identifying as LGBTQ, it's all compounded into one, is going up in some states. Absolutely. Part of that is because it's becoming trendy. Part of that is because people are feeling more comfortable being able to come out as LGBTQ. Absolutely. It's something to take notice of. It's something to pay attention to. I don't think it's something that causes this alarm where it's like we're destroying our society. Like I said, I think that's social media. And like, in my opinion, oppressive, over-sexualized beauty standards on women is what's causing this in a lot of instances.
He said for people who are truly experiencing gender dysphoria, which we recognize exists, and those who are experiencing what is now going to be called, or in the future going to be called, this social contagion gender dysphoria, where they're being exposed to it on social media or in school, or mom and dad are having a conversation about it with children, and children are now starting to develop gender confusion.
Or even
That might be happening a little bit. Maybe.
babies, right? People who are being born, they don't have to put the gender on the birth certificate, and they're saying you can choose whatever you want to be. Like, that's so dangerous. And even lying to them, saying like, oh, if we put you on hormone blockers at this age, it won't do anything to your puberty. It won't affect you long term. And it's just a straight up lie. And there's like an entire Reddit thread dedicated to people who transitioned, talking about.
Well, I wouldn't really use Reddit as an example, but yeah, I don't know the specifics. I know that they, like, the drugs that they use could potentially. So I've heard good arguments from like Blair White and Buck Angel talking about how some of the issues could be like, if you don't develop your penis enough, you couldn't be able to like have a transition surgery for to make a vagina, because it needs to be certain size. You may not be able to develop the ability to have kids if you don't go through like your natural puberty and then transition later. These are some things to worry about. It's very obviously, for sure,
about how much they hate their life now because they transitioned as a child, and now
sure.
they amputated off healthy body parts and are miserable.
All right.
Yeah, that can happen. That's the big question about like getting the correct treatment. Back in the day, we used to call it gender identity disorder instead of gender dysphoria, and it was overdiagnosed to such a drastic degree that it was so overdiagnosed that like 85% of people upwards would just like grow out of it because it was just overdiagnosed. And I wonder how many people of these detransitioners are those people. I do have like a friend who is a detransitioner, and they said that they they came to the doctor, and the doctor was very affirming of them. Like, I have gender dysphoria, and the doctor was very overly affirming of them. Instead of like, exploring potential other options. They didn't go super far in their transition, but there's definitely, I think, a question about like how good the doctors are necessarily. I think that's a reasonable question.
Can the disagree step forward?
It's so low.
The fact that the trans movement has got people shook has me so excited. The trans movement is not indoctrinating our youth. Our youth are understanding who they are at a younger age. And for what I was hearing over here is, a lot of what y'all were saying, I wonder would you say it to the parents? Because we need to really look at what the parents of trans youth really go through. Trans youth, instead of them enjoying their life, playing with their friends, they're up in legislation trying to fight for basic rights here. 1 in 5 transgender youth have tried to commit suicide. Why are we trying to police them?
But you're bringing it only.
Well, I think that's reasonable. This is a lot. This is like a big thing. Of course, I think it's reasonable to be questionable. One thing I will say though is that my bigger question is like, why are conservatives not looking at like the data from like a lot of medical professionals that says like, hey, this is a necessary treatment? Here's my thing: is that I used to be like super. I mean, I still am on the fence about it. I don't have super strong opinions about younger people going through like hormone treatments. I'm very apprehensive about it. But I remember I was talking to my wife about it. I'm like, I don't think anybody should transition before 18, which I still generally hold that mentality. But she asked me this question. She's like, what if your kid came to you and was really suffering with it from like a young age? So you're talking about like a 4-year-old, and they're like, oh, hey dad, I'm actually a girl, and like they were born my son, and I'm like, okay, whatever. And then like time goes on, and like now they're 10, and they're like, dad, I'm still a girl, and like now they're kind of like expressing themselves more femininely. They seem to be very unhappy, expressing themselves as a boy. And then time just continues on, and all of a sudden they go through puberty, and they start experiencing like tremendous just frustration and dysphoria associated with just going through a male puberty. And they're like, Dad, I'm like very sad. Even if they wouldn't kill themselves, it doesn't have to be that hyper about. Like, fuck, that would tear me up, man. You don't want your kid to be like sad, So I just want to do what's best for them, and that might be transitioning, and I wouldn't want to have to go through that decision, because what a horrible decision, dude. What a horrible decision to have to make, bro, because that's fucked up. You're not going to win either way. Like, oh, there's side effects, probably, but like that doesn't mean that they're not worth it. It's just so fucked, man. We just need to make sure that the people that get properly, like, are getting diagnosed or getting properly diagnosed when they go through these transitions, and they're not being led to get these transitional surgeries. They're getting, we're slowly easing into it,
To the parents, the question was indoctrination in general. Am I correct? And then,
But they're part of that conversation. Someone said something about drag shows coming to schools or whatnot. The kids enjoyed it. The parents just had a problem with it. But that's their issue. It's only someone dressed in drag reading a story.
Is
that
drag
could have
not
been anybody.
blackface for women? I see it as a caricature of womanhood.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. It's an interesting question though. Like, is it blackface for women? I've never like genuinely. This is a very new argument this isn't something women have ever really expressed when it came to trans people. This is like a very new thing where it's like, oh, I feel like I don't think it's a genuine argument, because when you actually put blackface on, historically blackface has been used to mock black people and take their jobs in musicals and whatnot. Whereas like being trans is like obviously gender dysphoria. We already established that being gay, or excuse me, that being trans or race and gender are profoundly different things, and they're not even close to comparable. But they're definitely, like, all drag shows are like respect for famous, like, prolific, I guess, famous women, and they've never expressed that issue. And now it's, drag is not trans though. I don't think that it is. I don't think it's anywhere near that. I don't do women feel offended? I mean, I could see why people might be offended if, like, from a sports perspective, if they're having their jobs like displaced. See, that's where I could understand that, because, like, if trans women in sports, I think will displace women in sports in some capacity, even if there isn't enough volume to like only to be trans women in sports, trans women will rise to the top in female sports. So, and they could really hurt somebody, especially in like a contact sport, because you still have a lot of your shit maintains like your bone density and whatnot. So
Inherently sexual as
insulting.
well.
I have to agree with you guys. I do not like the drag queen social hours. I personally,
Based.
as a trans person, didn't ever go to a drag show until I was about 40. I'm not for the sexualization of kids. Why are we
they say 14, 40?
ever go to a drag show until I was about 40?
Oh, I think they say 40. Well, that makes sense. Probably wasn't as acceptable, but okay, based.
I'm not for the sexualization of kids. Why are we not letting kids be kids and bringing sex into their life so early?
I think
True.
it's predatory in general to talk about sex with children.
Yeah.
Well, that's just stupid. I mean, there's a difference between not going to a sexualized drag show as a kid, which makes it. And again, let's talk about letting young girls go to sexualized shows of not like non-drag shows. There's a difference between that and like educating kids on like sex in the way that they need to be. Like unfortunately, we have to educate like 14-year-old kids on sex so that they know what's going through their body, and so that like abstinence-free sexual health education leads to higher pregnancy rates and higher abortion rates. So the reality is, you need to teach kids about safe sex, how to have it, how not to be pressured into having it, and et cetera, et cetera. That's a difference. It's not predatory to teach your kid about these types of things. It's predatory if an adult's like, you want to fuck me? Like, obviously that's disgusting, but that's not quite what we're seeing here at all. It's a very different thing.
Straight sex, any kind of sex.
Who's teaching sex to third grade children? I really want to know.
Have you looked at the California curriculum for sex education? You need to.
I know that when I was in preschool, I got my first crush on.
They said third graders. How old are you in third grade? Age in third grade, 8 to 9. That seems very young. Is that what they're actually teaching kids? That's obviously too young. I feel like 12 maybe is appropriate. But
A boy, because
how do I feel about the case with trans women nude in the spas around women and young girls? Yeah, I actually covered that on like the other channel, obviously before I transitioned, but because this is my trans channel now, so this is the new main channel. But anyway, listen, I understand. So just fundamentally, like a trans woman in a spa, there's two factors to this. For the trans person, let's say that they're well intentioned. There's somebody that wants to be seen as a valid woman, but if they're not very passable, for the cisgender women, that can make them feel very uncomfortable because they're seeing someone who's perceived as a man who may still have a lot of their biological advantages inside of a woman's space, and that can make them feel unsafe. I think that the conversation about trans women needs to be centralized less around like, are they women, and more around like, what does it mean for a trans woman to be a woman? What spaces should trans women occupy? Should they occupy sports? Probably not. Should they disclose that they're trans before dating? Obviously. Trans women and men, obviously. When it comes to bathrooms, how should we operate that? I think it's fine in bathrooms. In a locker room, is it different? Maybe. I think that I can understand that. That's where I think that the conversation needs to kind of centralize around, is a little, instead of just being like no to trans women or trans people, more like what does it mean for that person to be trans in like a traditional like cis space,
to me at the time, he was in kindergarten, he looked like Prince Eric from
Little Mermaid.
Yeah, Little Mermaid.
Cringe.
I don't think like fucking him ever crossed my mind when I was 4, but obviously like it would have been good to know that like it's okay, like if you have these feelings for someone of the same sex.
We think of youth in
fair.
general, they're having sex at a lot younger age, whether we like it or not. Let's just keep it 100% real.
You don't think it's because of that?
No, it's not because you think that it's not because gay people aren't making kids have sex more. Okay, it's the fucking. You want to talk about that? It's more of like how it's more of our music culture is much more sexualized. Get the fuck out of here from it on trans people.
do not think it's because of that. It starts at home with parents teaching their children.
True.
Because one or two things are going to happen. Either
That's true. We have a lot of fucking bad parents now. We have a lot of absentee fathers, especially, and we're not getting strong role models in the household. Let's be fucking real, bro.
teach your children or the world is going to teach your kids. That's the reality of it.
They are learning about it at younger ages from some adults or even their peers who learned about it from adults. That is, in definition, indoctrination. As a mother,
I wouldn't use the word indoctrination. Learning about something isn't indoctrinating somebody. It may be conditioning. It's just educating, though. You know, like unless you think that unless you're gonna use like, oh, I got indoctrinated in my science class today about how there's cum in my balls. You know what I mean? Like the word indoctrination is so morally loaded. It's not the same as educating somebody on. Indoctrination implies like something much deeper. It implies like an LGBTQ fucking conspiracy to ruin the world. Like that's what it really implies. It's a little extreme.
and seeing what my children are going to have to be introduced to at such a young age, like I didn't even know what a gay person was till I was like 12. And so they're going to be having.
Maybe that's a problem, bro. Listen, not for nothing, but when I was like 12 years old, like I was super fucking like I was in fear of my identity. I was terrified. Like I remember thinking I might be fucking gay, and I remember thinking that that would be a problem if I was gay, and I don't want to be gay, and I would be sad. That's not something that's like a good thing. Teach your kid that it's okay to be fucking gay. Like that's okay. And then luckily I'm not gay, not that gay. I'm a little, you know, a femboy every once in a while. You know what I'm saying? But you know, if you just pretend they're girls and everything's okay, then it's not gay anymore. No, but like, yeah, what's the problem with teaching a 12-year-old like fucking gay people exist? Like, bro, like your kid's not gonna magically turn fucking gay because they saw like two gay people existing holding hands in public. If they get fucking, if your kid looks at two gay dudes holding hands in public and they're like, oh my god, I'm gay, they were gay from the start. Okay, your kid was gay already. Let's be real here, all right? It's not just gonna magically like, oh my god, you know, it's not that big of a deal. All right, my wife has a gay best friend. They're probably gonna be like the uncles to our kids. We're going to be the aunt and uncle to their kids. That's how life's going to be, all right? My kid's not going to go like, oh, my God, I'm morphing. Oh, Jesus. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, kids aren't just going to magically turn fucking gay just because they exist around gay people. A lot of this is just, you know, most of this is just something that just happens, like, in the fucking womb or just, say, born gay biologically in some capacity. That's the reality, bro.
These really heavy adult conversations.
Yeah, I'm lucky I'm not gay. I don't want to be gay. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, guys, yeah, if I was gay, it'd be okay. But, bro, I don't want to face fucking, I don't want to face adversity in my life. People get so butthurt about that. I know you're just trolling, but, like, people get so butthurt. Like, I don't want to be gay. I don't want to be trans. I don't want my kid to be gay or trans. I don't want them to be these things because that just makes it harder for them to fucking succeed. If they were, I'm gonna love them and help them through their life. But, like, who wants to face some kind of fucking adversity in life? Like, I'm not an asshole. I'm not going to pretend that I want to do that. I'm a fucking normal human being that doesn't want to be. And I'm not saying that like being gay isn't normal. My point is I'm just like everybody else. I don't want to be oppressed.
That are really young.
Do you think that you're biased because you like femboys? Sure. I mean, if you're saying, do you think I'm a little biased towards gays people because I'm a little bit gay? Like, sure. But does that like a dunk on me, or is that just like a normal human being experience?
Age just because of their exposure, and that is honestly just scary because I don't want to have those conversations. That's why I will be homeschooling my kids.
You don't want to have
because I do believe it is my
okay.
responsibility to protect them and shield them from the outside world, which is targeting children.
The trans community and the trans movement.
Bro, your kid's gonna be fucked up if you protect them from everything in the outside world. You're gonna coddle your kid to the point where they're gonna be a failure in life. Let's be real.
Is really shaking the course of what people think gender identity is supposed to be.
So in one sentence, you're saying that you guys are not responsible for the indoctrination that's currently happening with
Absolutely
children.
not.
And in the second sentence, you are saying we are shook by the fact that you are responsible for it.
No, you are shook at the
What?
community.
To protect them and shield them from the outside world, which is targeting children.
The trans community and the trans movement is really shaking the course of what people think gender identity is supposed to be.
So in one sentence, you're saying that you guys are not responsible for the indoctrination that's currently happening with
Absolutely
children.
not.
And in the second sentence, you are saying we are shook by the fact that you are responsible for it.
No, you are shook
I have no idea how she got that from that. Either they edited it or she just had like a fucking woke brain fart moment, because I don't know how she got that out of there.
at the fact that the trans movement has become what it is.
And a movement that influences people
powerful-
all over the world, and particularly children. And we see it in the fact that the number of young people identifying as transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, genderqueer is skyrocketing, which means that children
In like California, sure.
are being exposed to these ideas, and it's certainly coming from institutions like the media, like Hollywood, like our public institutions and schools. So
now the next question is like, why is it bad? The problem is that she's this girl that's talking right now knows that she is a conservative content creator, and she knows the arguments. So she's going to come off as if she's going to win. But then you have to sit down and be like, okay, so why is it bad? And when you say that, you're actually saying LGBTQ. So the kids could just be gay, or they could just be bi. And like, where are these happening? Are you aware that some of these kids actually experience these things very validly, and that they're feeling more comfortable? And then there's some other people who are going to be trending. But like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to really ask the questions. But they're not going to be able to do that because like she's a very intelligent, like really debater is where we're at this point. Whereas everybody else there just is like a fucking regular person.
To say that that is not happening or to deny that that is the reality negates the numbers that we're seeing.
What I would say is that the idea that there is a single transgender movement and ideology is disingenuous, and that at its core, being transgender is about separating sex from sex roles and gender roles that are compulsory.
Do you think that children should be able to transition medically?
No.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so. We talked about it before. It's just such a rough fucking thing, man. I mean, I could give the argument for it I did before. It's just such a hard thing to deal with. But I would give the argument the same way that I did before.
I think it just really depends on each individual situation. They should be able to make the best medical decision for them.
That's the thing. Kids shouldn't be able to make any medical decision. It would be a mixture of parents and doctors, you know, and that's the trouble of it, you know. That's just the trouble of it, man.
I am comfortable.
That's just because a lot of people. Okay, so people like Steven Crowder and whatnot will constantly misquote statistics about how like 85% of trans people detransition if you do nothing with them, and they're referring to or things like trans people the suicidality stays the same even if they get surgeries, and the way that you debunk that is with the fact that that is an outdated study where people were overdiagnosed with gender identity disorder. That's what it used to be called, and that's not comparable to gender dysphoria, which is diagnosed today, which is much better. But then when you debunk it with that, which obviously debunks it, you come into a new problem. Is that like historically we've done the wrong thing when it comes to our diagnosis and our treatment methods of these gender issues. So it's like, fuck, how could you not be somewhat skeptical of what's going on? Because there is no long-term study about trans people. And unfortunately, like, you're going to have kids be the guinea pig. And that's like horrible. And like, that's a problem.
Rachel
so now,
just gifted 1 membership.
Hey, thank you so much for the gifted membership. I really appreciate that. But now you have this fucking problem here where, like, you know, we don't have any long-term data, it seems, on it. We might have short-term data, but we're all just like shooting blanks in the dark, right? That's how I accidentally came in a guy. And I'm sterile, apparently, according to that joke.
Nuke, clear W1, enter, radioactive, became
hey,
a member.
oh, you have to medium go. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Bathrooms with the other side.
I am comfortable sharing bathrooms with the other side. This is probably something that women are going to face as a little bit more than men. Like trans women, or excuse me, cis women are going to be more uncomfortable than cis men because like there's a power dynamic, there's a physical power dynamic. We understand this, and so like in a traditional female space, for a trans woman to go in there, I can see why it might make them uncomfortable. I could see as a man why it would make you uncomfortable as well. You know, but when it comes down to like if people were like fully, we'll say for lack of a better term, passable, you'd have less of an issue with it because you wouldn't be able to tell, right? And so that's a conversation about providing gender affirming care to trans people who, you know, actually have it. And it's a whole conversation about like healthcare access and whatnot. That's just expensive, bro.
Yes, I feel comfortable. Safe? That might be a different question, but comfortable? Yes, I feel comfortable.
What I think the bathroom issue opens up is an issue of predatory men taking advantage of the opening. That now they could walk into a women's bathroom or a women's locker room, as we've seen happen in instances like here in Los Angeles at We Spa. And they go into a women's space, they expose themselves to the women, and then they say, well, I'm a trans woman and you've opened up this space for me.
But we cannot.
Okay, but then you're blaming trans people for something that bad cis people are doing, and that's just simply unfair. I don't really know what else to tell you with that. It's just an unfair thing to blame trans people for. One of the problems I also have with that is the reality that we like people, and they seem to be very concerned about a man pretending to be a woman, not a trans woman, but a man pretending to be a woman and going into a female space and committing some kind of predatory action. But nobody's really that concerned with a man going into a male space and committing the same predatory action onto like another man or a young boy. You know what I mean? And so to me, and maybe it just feels a little bit like a virtue signal. It feels like you don't necessarily care about that issue, this situation that doesn't seem to be happening in any widespread case. It's more about just trying to figure out ways to dunk on trans women. But again, we don't have this perspective when it comes to young boys getting molested in these spaces as well. So I don't know.
Not blame trans people for that. And
nobody's blaming you.
That's the
She just did. You just blamed her. You just did.
right here. Because again, when you walk into the bathroom, I'm not interested in knowing what you are, what you identify as. I'm trying to use the bathroom and leave out of there. What people have tried to say is that when trans women go into the bathroom, they're being predatory, and that is not the case. That is something we do not blame on trans women.
She effectively, like, she said it without saying it. She's like, you're blaming trans women for an issue that should be like an issue of cisgendered, like some, not even a lot, but some cisgendered men. So you were kind of blaming them.
Although you were not saying that, when we talk about predatory behavior and when we talk about like the predatory cases, none of them have been trans women. So I just want to make sure. I know she's not. I know she's not strictly doing that, but because she said that, I think it's very important that I bring that out.
I like this woman a lot. She knows what she's talking about, and she's calling the other woman on her ship
on the table and discuss that.
We have to have the conversation. Now, I'll open up the question. We know that if this legislation happens, if we move forward with this move, there are going to be men who take advantage of it. Now, I want to ask you, is your comfort as far as going to the bathroom more important than the female women that will be victimized by this?
Who said?
I mean, you'd have to look at the statistics to see if this is actually happening in any wide-scale case. But also, like, I guess it's a case by case, but like, are trans women like not allowed into these bathrooms right now? Because I feel like they are.
Female women will be victimized by this.
They will, and they have.
No, you're only assuming, but the reality.
I mean, like, what is the statistic on like this actually happening? You don't. I feel like every time this happens, we see a public story, and we haven't seen a whole lot of public stories about this type of a situation where a man pretends to be a woman, not a trans woman, goes into a woman's space and then like commits some kind of predatory action. We've seen like one in the past like 2 years. That's from what I've seen. It doesn't seem to be happening that much. You know.
Yeah, it is, again, when people are going into the restroom, when people are only going into the restroom, they're only focused on doing one or two things, and that's using the restroom.
Yeah. But you didn't answer the question. Is your comfort more important than the female people who could be victimized by this?
Okay, so let me help her answer the question.
I mean, you want like a pragmatic take? Like, if one woman is getting victimized per year and like 20,000 trans women are feeling more comfortable, like, probably would be worth it. I mean, this conversation about like just general comfort, we could apply it to like a lot of different things. You know, I mean, what we could probably apply it to a lot of different things. Like, I guess we just shouldn't let shouldn't let kids in bathrooms. Like, we shouldn't let any kid then in a bathroom with any adult because of the potential of them getting molested in the bathroom. But we would probably say that that's not something that's necessary. I think if anything, we need better police structures to deal with that potential problem if it does happen. I mean, so the problem is that exact same argument can be applied to guns. So, like, why then? By your logic, we should take away all guns because, like, what's more valuable to you? Like, people getting shot and killed unjustifiably because of the like gun pipeline access, or people having guns? And they'd be like, well, no, we should have guns because we. And then all of a sudden, like, they're debunking their own argument. There's unfortunately a certain amount of risk that's going to be associated with different things. That's it.
Which one do you think I'm going to get the kick out of me in? It wasn't the women's restroom. The issue that you're bringing up, first of all, is already violating a whole bunch of laws. Okay, if somebody's exposing themselves in a bathroom, that's a whole different environment rather than just letting trans people in. In California, it's right now 100% legal for trans people to go use the bathroom of their choice. So I don't know what law you're talking about.
You're asking this question as if I would not stand up for cis women that were in the restroom, and that's not the case. Nice dodge there. But the reality of it is, one thing I'm noticing is we're reducing a lot of these particular conversations to genitalia, and it's not about genitalia. It's about safety.
Yeah, her concern is the possibility of predation. And
that's actually a good point, too, about safety. Actually, that's a really good point. Because then you say how many, especially trans women, could get violently assaulted inside of a male's bathroom because they're just physically weaker because they are on hormones. So it's a question about it's actually a question about safety for those trans people, not just safety for those cis people. So how about having single people bathrooms? I agree with that 100%. Absolutely. I'm like 1,000% on board with what you're saying right now. Like, in all honesty, it really is a good idea to focus on something like that. Absolutely.
And that's still a probability. It doesn't matter if trans people are using the restroom or not. Sure. But what you're concerned about is that you're possibly that people feel more emboldened to put on women's clothes and go in the bathroom. But they're still violating the law all over the place if that's the purpose that they're going in for.
Yeah, so I didn't step forward because, and I know in today's age this is going to sound very radical, and but I don't agree with the whole transgender ideology, and so for me, it's really encouraging something that is based in what I feel is delusion, and so I don't think that we should be encouraging that by allowing men into women's restrooms.
I mean, that's such a loaded thing. You'd have to start at the very like start of like trans affirming issues. You'd have to start like way at the start. Like this isn't something you could tackle without going through like the pure core of it. So all I can give you is the reason why I'm trans affirming and like my journey on becoming trans accepting. For me, it starts with gender dysphoria. Let's talk about that more than anything else because that's what we're referring to. People who go in different bathrooms. Like if you're non-binary and you identify as a guy, but you're still like presenting as a woman and shit, you're not. If you go into the fucking male bathroom, you're like stop. You're being stupid. But we're talking about trans people that are going through transitioning, right? For me, it is a mental issue, mental disorder. I think it's still classified in the DSM-5, right? It should be. The reason why they want to declassify it is because people are being invalidating to trans people by saying, oh, it's just a mental disorder. But a lot of things are mental issues. ADHD is a mental issue. Autism is a mental issue. There's a myriad of different mental issues. And at the end of the day, the way that we treat these issues is we treat them based on what is going to have the highest probability for success in that person being able to exist in society without hurting society. That's what it comes down to. So for me, trans people getting gender affirming care correctly, because historically we haven't done it correctly, right? By seeing a therapist, going on hormones correctly, which is like a slow transition while you set your expectation. This is usually what they do. You set your expectation of what you want to look like, and then you reel that expectation as you transition, and you get to a point where you can be happy. I think you should try to be as happy as possible with as little amount of transitioning as possible. That's up to a therapist. I'm not a fucking mental health professional, right? And that's what it comes down to because it has higher outcomes in life, right? Again, we've talked about that statistic that's out of context where people were overdiagnosed with gender identity disorder, and that it says that the transition didn't work, but it actually will work. Better now, obviously, but that's based on a lot of mental health focus as well, because gender identity disorder didn't have a lot of mental health focus. We didn't have that because this was from 1970, right? That's what sold it for me. And it doesn't hurt society to allow somebody to identify and to transition safely for themselves. It'll increase outcomes. It'll make these people happier. That's just the reality, and don't especially if they actually have access to full transition to their point, right? Look at somebody like Blair White. They're much happier than somebody who maybe is just like day one on HRT and can't afford to get in any surgery. There's a lot of shit going on there, and that's what gets it for me. That's what pretty much gets it for me. And I think a lot of people are born trans in some capacity, or born, just like I think a lot of people are born gay. There's biological factors, there's factors of gene washing or hormone washing, in the womb, and there's probably some social factors, but I don't think that I think that the other two are more prevalent. And so when you have somebody who's not going to just be able to change by saying, I don't want to do this anymore, what are you supposed to do? You can't just choose to not be trans, because if you could just choose to be, I could just choose to be a girl. Oh, I'm a girl. It's not, doesn't work like that. I'm not happy thinking like that. That'd be fucking preposterous. I'd hate myself. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody, you know what I mean? So we should just help these people. That's it. The better outcomes. Who cares? That's it. That's where it comes from me. And you have to start there. There's no way to quickly wash through her thing. She just doesn't understand trans people. So she probably not the best person to be on the panel, but.
I think that if that's the case, that to some extent all gender is delusion. If we're looking at historically anywhere from, midwives after the enclosure of the commons in the 1400s, having their whole trade affected, or brewsters having their trade affected, and now we don't think of women as brewsters, or that creating beer is a womanly thing. These all came from social conditions. These all came, a lot of gender, regardless of biological sex, it didn't naturally flow out of our genitals, and it was we're like, this is how my genitals are, so this is how my gender is going to be. That didn't happen. That's not life. A lot of people who are either transgender or who are LGBT in general, all my friends were girls. At first, I just remember there were a lot of things where I would kind of come up against people telling me that that's wrong, that whether it's something I like.
Okay, I'm trying to understand the Brewster argument. Apparently, Brewsters used to be most people who brewed beer were Brewsters because they were women, and brewers were men, and they were distinctly different. I understand what they're talking about, I guess, fundamentally when it comes to just gender roles. Some of them are socially constructed, for sure. I get what they're saying, but obviously, the counter arguments that would be okay, if you're born a woman, and you would naturally identify as a woman, so it seems less, and I wouldn't use this word, but they're using the word delusional, basically. But okay.
Something I want to do. It wasn't until kindergarten that someone told me that I'm a boy, and I was like, oh, I don't feel comfortable going to any bathroom in this world, in the current society we live in. And to make trans women the whipping girls of that,
that's kind of fair.
I think that's disingenuous, but I do think that we need a systemic change to make ourselves safer. I don't really know anyone who doesn't feel a little bit uncomfortable going to the bathroom.
And trans people are not a delusion. Let's make it very clear. We're here. We've been here for ages. We've been here since the beginning of time. We're in your history books. And I think it's very disingenuous to say that a whole identity is a delusion.
I believe that you
Well, I guess the delusional is characterized by or holding false beliefs or judgments about external reality that are held despite incontrovertible evidence to the contrary. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't consider trans people delusional though, because you can literally change your gender, not your sex though.
We've been here for ages. We've been here since the beginning of time. We're in your history books.
That's an interesting point to make, only because it's an interesting thing to think about how like back in the day when there wasn't available options to be able to transition to the degree that you can now, we didn't seem to have as many trans people. And the reason I think it's just interesting because I wonder how much of it like has to do with like the availability. You know what I mean? Like the availability argument. Like now that we have the availability of like particular treatments, how more people are like, oh, I want to do that thing, you know, when you actually have an option. Because that's the thing, if you have it's like a psychological process. I remember this was a thing that was done in school where like there's two groups. Group A gets to choose between two paintings. Group B, there's two groups, A and B, both get to choose one painting, but a week later Group B gets to come back and they can decide if they want to change their painting. Group A was substantially more happy with their decision because they had no other decision to make, right? They couldn't go back and change their decision. And I think it has a little bit to do with that. Like when you can only have one decision, it makes it a little bit more difficult to think that, or when you only have one decision, it makes it easier to be like, that's the decision I have to make because that's all you can do. I think that's where that would come from.
And I think it's very disingenuous to say that a whole identity is a delusion.
I believe that you feel like women. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there is an objective truth, and I don't believe in his truth, her truth, their truth, my truth. Like there is truth, and
Who defined that truth?
And like it's already defined. And I, as a Christian, I believe God is the one who set truth.
But who defined that?
Is the truth?
Can you tell me who defined that?
God.
Living in the Bible Belt with religion taking center stage, it's hard for a lot of trans and non-binary folks like myself to really be able to express who they are. I had to really take on my gender dysphoria in private. I couldn't talk to my mom about it. I couldn't talk to my dad, my siblings, because ultimately I felt like it wasn't going to lead to anything because there wasn't a lot of education in the cis community like there is in the trans and non-binary community. We're talking about a book that was written by man with his own bias.
Who created chromosomes?
Yeah, I'm personally not religious and I believe in science.
When we talk about chromosomes, it goes back to the conversation we were talking about earlier about being intersex.
So we're not talking about intersex. We're talking about people who were born as a male and they tried to transition. The whole fact that they're trying to transition.
So a lot of times people will bring up intersex. Obviously, probably not like the best way to operate. But what I will say is that like the way I kind of like look at it a little bit is one is the intersex of, we'll say, the body, and the other would be like the intersex of the mind, right? If our body is obviously there's an intersex for our body. Who's to say that there isn't one for our brain? Who's to say that like trans people don't have the intersex of the brain? That makes the most sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me, you know? Because that's the possibility. That maybe there's like an intersex of the brain and that's where it comes from, right? So that's kind of how I think about it.
Into a female in the first place shows that they aren't actually that, or else there would be no need to transition, right? So you say, okay, I feel like a woman. What is that? What does that feel like?
Yeah, how does
and
that
how do you know?
I'm not saying I feel like a woman. I am a woman.
So then why did you transition? Why can't you just present as a man but be a woman?
I transitioned so I could be who I
Well, you would have that problem with that too. And well, like you wouldn't.
was. I did not feel like I was the person that I identified with when I was born. So I took the steps to align my outside body with how I feel on the inside. What makes you stand up every day and make you identify as a woman? Let me challenge you on that.
I am a woman, and I don't like being called a cis woman because I'm not a cis woman. I'm a woman. I'm not a birthing person. I'm a mother.
So get mad at the terminology, not at trans people.
It's your new terminology.
But this is what I notice a lot of cis women do. The terminology has been around for so long. Cis is a prefix. Cis means same. Instead of getting mad at trans and non-binary people for using updated terminology, get mad at Webster. You're not going along with the times and being educated on the different pronouns and the different identities.
You have to admit, some of the pronouns are
I mean, who cares? Like, it's literally, this is my thing. I don't really understand why, like, it's so weird to me that they, like, why are you offended by being called cisgender? It just means you're not trans. It's not that deep. It's so sensitive. It's just a very sensitive thing. Like, why are you so sensitive? That's just bizarre. Like, I don't understand, because like I feel like nobody actually gives a fuck. Like the existence of trans men don't threaten my fucking existence. It does literally no bearing on me. These cisgender trans people don't hurt cis people.
Are kind of ridiculous. I mean, to be with all due respect, I mean, even I'm sure you have to agree some of the pronouns.
I don't
people
think
use.
they're ridiculous. I think they're very expansive. Trans and non-binary people just want you to respect their chosen pronoun. We are not trying to force pronouns on you. Just understand that the terminology is going to continue to grow. If you're willing to educate yourself and understand, then you've got it.
The ability to give birth is a woman's greatest strength.
Interesting question. I mean, is the ability to give birth is a woman's greatest strength? I don't think it's a woman's greatest strength. I think it is a great strength, but it's not the only strength. I mean, like that question is like if a woman who's if a cisgendered woman, a biological woman, couldn't have babies, would you invalidate her womanhood? She's probably not, right? So I don't think. I mean, I think it's a great strength, but I don't think if you don't have it, I don't think it means that you aren't a woman, right? So, I mean, if you do, then I mean, I guess tell infertile women that they're not real women, and then see if they cry and see if you feel bad. You know what I mean? So yeah, okay.
Can the disagreeer step forward?
I'm not able to have children.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, that just boils down women to just like babies. You know what I mean? That's the same thing as if you said like, is a man's greatest strength their penis, and it's like it's not. You know what I mean? It's mine though. You know.
So I'm still strong. I'm funny. I'm physically strong. I'm smart, and I have a lot of strength. I don't believe that having a baby is the greatest strength, because not all of us can. I cannot have kids due to medical issues from a medical procedure that I had when I was younger.
Damn.
And it's
I'm curious, but that sucks.
It's a hard subject to talk about. It's doesn't mean I'm any less of a woman, but can we get another question? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
One of the things that I regret
That sucks. That's tough.
that was the fact that I would never be able to do that. But I was honored in the ability to participate it from the other side. Women are amazing. They don't just deal with that. So.
While giving birth is not a woman.
I think a big thing too is that like a lot of trans women like are jealous of cisgender women for being able to have kids. Like I'm not saying that to be shitty, but it's like, you know, it's not like it's something that they're trying to put other women down. It's just like, fuck, I wish I was this thing, you know? They're already dealing with enough. You know what I'm saying, dude? You know what I'm saying?
Women's greatest strength. I do think that only biological women are capable of going through that process and bringing
absolutely.
life into the world.
I need to push back on that because
Well, that is true. I wonder if we'll ever get to a place like technologically where somebody can like donate their fucking uterus or something and be able to actually like trans women can actually have kids.
we're also forgetting that trans men and trans masculine people can also give birth as well. And I don't think it's fair to just set it on one group that says that just biological women have that power to just give birth. And we have to be very clear when we look at the nuances of birth.
I recognize that
She has a good point, like fundamentally, that like if you notice, anytime we're talking about transness, we never talk about trans men ever. We only talk about trans women every single time. Like we never, like you never see a man talking about anything when it comes to trans women or trans men. Nobody cares. It's only trans women who feel threatened by, or excuse me, it's only cisgender women who feel threatened by trans women, which I get it in some cases, but like I haven't seen a single conservative man be like, "Oh, a trans man threatens my existence as a man." It's like, no, it doesn't. You know what I mean?
are people who have different identities. There are biological women who identify as men and then go on to give birth. I would argue, however, that those people are still biological women.
Well, yeah.
I know that is something that can affect.
Everybody knows that. Trans women are, yeah, that's why they call trans, because they're not biological women. They're cisgender women. I mean, excuse me, they're gender women. Of course, that's what the word trans means.
Offend many, but that stands as my belief.
So the correct term is actually cisgendered woman. Cis means it means that you identify with the birth that you were assigned. And so,
Cis
you know,
woman,
I just
bro,
really,
man.
really wish that we would kind of be a little bit more mutable to the terminology, because I think that's what really is going to open up that dialogue and that discussion.
If I may, I think the crux of the conversation kind of comes back to, are trans women women? And I think if we don't agree
Yeah,
there,
see.
it's going to be very difficult to kind of.
Yeah, see, I told you, like, you're not gonna be able to get any. She's not gonna be able to engage in this conversation other than saying that trans women are women, and there's not gonna be any like nuance to it because she just doesn't understand. And like, you know,
the conversation going, or even agree on the points that you guys are talking about, because if we don't believe that trans women are women, then the conversation kind of ends there in terms of whether they're like men can give birth or not, if that makes sense.
That is true.
I'm not sure that's the case. I feel like the ability to give birth is not like the end all be all of a woman's like meaning in life. And herself and her personality. And I think that if you can acknowledge that, I would also then maybe challenge the idea that womanhood, as opposed to like a female sex, like womanhood is a consistent thing that has always been one way.
So how would you define womanhood?
You sound like Matt Walsh.
It's a good question.
Womanhood, to me, is about standing in integrity. It is about being confident in who you are. And me, as a Black trans woman, should not be a threat to you. And what I see from a lot of cisgender women is they're trying to deem what womanhood is supposed to look like. I have my own perspective of womanhood. We can coexist in the same world, but the reality is we get so stuck on parts. Having a vagina is not the only thing that makes you a woman. I'm sorry. It takes integrity, it takes courage, it takes lifting other women up. It takes those things to begin to defy womanhood, and there's so many other different things.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so if I were a white person,
Like I obviously identify with like being a man to a greater degree, but I say it all the time. It's like my moral philosophy on what tries to keep me like grounded and guided in the correct direction. But I always say over and over again that like women can adhere to the same moral philosophy that I adhere to. It's just something that makes me feel better about myself. At the end of the day, women and men aren't really that much different in the sense of like the way that they have to interact in society. Like we could do whatever we want for the most part, as long as we are physically capable of being able to do that thing. That's it. Right? That's the society we live in. So what it means to be a man and woman is quickly going away. It doesn't really matter. That's the whole point here, is that like none of this really matters that much when it comes to that. Like I personally identify a lot with being a man, and like again, men tend to be physically stronger, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter. Most like women can do pretty much any job a man can. Obviously, there's different things that like could be impeded in some capacity, but it doesn't really matter that much anymore. Like we don't really have gendered spaces anymore. We really shouldn't. Dry. Holy fuck.
and
I understand like active combat roles. That's a whole different conversation, but most jobs aren't that.
Said Blackness is about integrity and courage, and kind of the same thing that you used to define womanhood. And then I said I want to transition into a Black person, and I'm white. And I'm redefining what Blackness is to fit what I view it as, right? There's no objective reality of what Blackness is. Would you consider that appropriation, or do you think that's something I should be allowed to do?
I consider that dodging, and I consider that comparing apples to oranges.
I brought this already at the beginning of the video, so I'm not going to re-explain myself, but yeah.
Because race and gender identity are two separate different
Very
things.
true, yeah.
Because when we look at race, we have to look at many, many different structures of what whiteness and white supremacy looks like, and how white supremacy can be manipulated into other things. And what happens is
there simply wouldn't be this issue if like we didn't have like racial inequalities like that. None of this would actually matter. You know what I mean? Like as we care less, as we fix racial inequalities, like race will matter less and less, and that's how really it should become. But
is the closer you are in proximity to whiteness, you're able to weaponize it against other people. It reminds me a lot of Rachel Dolezal, who masqueraded as a Black woman. It really did open up many more.
I think that Rachel actually thought she was a Black woman. That was the crazy part. Like she is so bizarre.
Doors of conversations around it, but it's still wrong. It's still not fair, because she will still ultimately have a privilege that I, as a Black trans woman, would not begin to have.
What's interesting is that we're talking about race and gender, or as we probably like to call it on our side, sex. Race actually has a more understandable structure for people being transracial. Race does actually exist on a spectrum. I'm biracial. Many perceive me to be Black, even though...
Yeah, but race doesn't mean anything. Like race has literally no meaning in the world. That's why it's less, like, the difference between Black and white people are profoundly less than differences between men and women. What are you talking about? Like, biologically speaking, what are you even talking about? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense.
No, I am also half white and half Black. We label people like President Obama as a Black president, even though he is as well. Race has never had binary markers. It does exist on a spectrum. Gender, however, does have binary markers.
I'm trying to understand. I simply don't understand what she's saying. Like literally, the only biological marker of a Black person is that they're Black. Like there's nothing else there. I don't understand her point. Like men and women are profoundly different. It makes more sense for somebody's transgenderism to manifest itself much more deeply than someone's transracialism. That's why it doesn't make any sense. It's bigger than Black and white, baby. I just don't get the fucking point.
As much as we try, as much as we change the way that we self-present, chromosomes are not going to change. Okay. And that's just a reality.
All right, I'm going to bring up a little point here, because you talked about the binary side of gender. Well, I was born a little both. I believe I've never had my chromosomes checked, but since I fathered 2 children, I'm assuming I have the correct male chromosomes. So I was intersexed, and there's a lot of reasons that happens, none of which are well studied or understood, but a friend of mine in the pediatric trauma world says about 1 in 150 kids come out with some degree of ambiguity in their gender. For me, that appeared as always feeling out of place. And for the first week of my life, I was in the surgical wards at Naval Hospital in San Diego, getting pieces of me cut off. So, and then they gave me testosterone for the first 11 years of my life. I
mean, I guess from a biological perspective, there is a little bit of a spectrum, even biologically. Like if you think about it like this, like different men and women, like I don't have the same testosterone or estrogen level as every other man in the world, right? Like I have, if you're like 5'3" and you've got, you probably don't have the same level of testosterone as I do. Tallness is tend to be seen as so testosterone is masculine. I have more testosterone than some people. Height is considered more masculine. I have more height than other people, right? There's a bunch of different masculine, like the size of your hands are considered more masculine. So if you have smaller hands and you're a man with less testosterone and you're shorter, you'd be considered more feminine, but we still consider you a man. But there is like kind of a spectrum in some capacity, some degree. I guess the only biological aspect that we really care about though is like penis, vagina. I get that, but there is kind of like a bimodalness ish to it in a way that's not really doesn't matter that much. But
I wish the world were truly sexually binary. It would make it so much easier. But there is a little bit of a smear. And as a trans person, I'm a very conservative trans person. I don't see the huge gender spectrum that a lot of people in the trans community do. Do I feel better having transitioned? Yes, absolutely. I used to live in a little shell, very large shell, but now I'm much more open about who I am. Is that the only thing that generally defines a woman? No, I don't think that is the only thing that generally defines a woman.
Right. I think there are a lot of women who may be on our side of the argument who will try to maybe invalidate your experiences by saying you can't give birth or you can't have a period. And while those things may be true, I'm sure there's a lot of other different struggles that you all are going through. And I would truly believe that
she's really like, she has the talking points, but she's much more nervous than I thought that she would be. She's like super uncomfortable around people. She's a little bit, she has so much more confidence when she's not in this. I mean, maybe she's just not familiar with it or something. But.
You probably are highly discriminated against in our society, and it is hard to be you. It is hard to go through the things that you go through and have to deal with some of the responses that you get from people. And, it's not a struggle that I would wish on myself at all.
Not a struggle I wish on my worst enemy.
Trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports.
No. Hard no, but I'm very trans affirming, but like the reality is that a trans woman, especially that goes through a male puberty, they could hurt a cisgender woman. Okay. And I don't say that for fun. I'm not like, fuck you. Like, no trans person is transitioning just so that they compete in sports. That's just a stupid myth people like to bring up. It's not real. But the reality is that like a trans woman maintains a significant amount of their biology. They keep like the bone mass, the height, some of the weight, the densities, the this, that. There's a hip flexion. There's a lot of different things. And it'll hurt women. Trans women they may not be completely displaced cisgender women, but they would rise to the top and they would take away a lot of opportunities for cis women. The reality is that like there is no such thing as male and female sports. There is sports and then there's female sports, because sports is just about the best of the best who can compete. Then women were like, we can't be that, so can we have our own? And they were like, yeah, sure. So it's a protected space for what I would say biological women. Of course, there's going to be some women that are going to have biological advantages, but we generally classify this as men and women. That's very simple. And if you allowed trans women into there, you're going to see them. They're going to have a disproportionate advantage. It's pretty much that's pretty much it. That's just it. I don't say that with pride. It doesn't make me feel good. It's just like you could hurt somebody. You could in a physical context where you could hurt somebody.
I do think that trans women have every right to compete in women's sports. When trans women are on hormones, the hormones break their body down. Having gender-affirming surgery breaks down the body. And so I think it's
not enough. I just want to let you know, especially since they don't make you cut your testicles off. I don't think you should have to. I'm just saying that you shouldn't be able to compete. It's simply just not enough, man. It's not, I know they're a woman, but you know what I mean.
Really need to be educated before we jump to a conclusion that trans women are stronger than cis women in sports.
They just are.
Hi, everybody.
I find it interesting that you assume that people who disagree with you are uneducated. And I will speak out against that. I think the research shows that trans women do happen to have a biological advantage against biological women. Even though you are taking hormones and that does start to change your body and level things out, we're talking about primarily people who have transitioned post-puberty, which means they do have male bone density, male wingspan, male hand size, feet size, lung capacity. All of these things are going against women, biological women, when trans women start to enter their spaces, their sports, and compete against them. And this is really concerning for me.
I think for me, it's not a question of whether or not trans women can compete in sports. It's a question of how can we change the institution of sports in this country to make it equitable and to create more opportunity for cis women, for trans women. And like, that's kind of like why I wanted to.
I mean, they just couldn't, I guess. I don't know how you could make like trans only leagues, but that's not going to really be enough women to compete in there to be have any like actual, real impact. I get, but okay, sure.
Actually ask you all, like, what has your relationship to sports been?
I don't think you have to have a direct relationship to sports to realize that women are being affected by this issue, and I do reject the idea of equity. There is no way to come about an equality of outcome, which is what equity is saying. There's a reason that women's sports are less funded and less watched than men's sports. It's because men seem to excel athletically, and they seem to press the bounds of athleticism way farther than women do.
You just got to make more. You have to make more girl sports like knitting or something, and then bada bing, bada boom.
We now exist on a slippery slope. If it's female sports, is it then female locker rooms? Is it then female prisons, which we're now seeing becoming an issue here in California, where biological male inmates are being put in female facilities because they identify as women?
Yeah, I mean, that's another conversation as well. Like maybe we should have like separate holding facilities for trans people. Like a little, like that makes the most sense to me. Sure, I get that.
We have to discuss as a society how much we give into the feelings of wanting everybody to be accepted and how much we are willing to do that at the expense of biological women.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's unsafe in the situation, for sure, I think that's a conversation to have. Yeah.
I use myself as an example.
Esports,
This is about how big I was in junior high school and early high school. I used to be able to walk up to a V8 engine block, pick it up off the floor, and set it on a table.
Based.
And if I was in powerlifting or weightlifting, that amount of, that advantage was just unbelievable. I've been on hormones for 15 years. Did it weaken me? Absolutely. Did my bone density really hasn't changed? My muscular hasn't changed? And this is not a binary question. There's a lot of nuances involved.
I just want to ask a question for what you were saying. Can you throw out some statistics?
I don't think you need to have their...
I mean, you could look up the statistics if you really want. There's been so many. I mean, honestly, I would look up more plates, more dates for transitioning. So if you truly care, then you could look up the videos by more plates, more dates. It was good. I simply could not articulate it in any way anywhere close to more plates, more dates. He's just more intelligent than I am when it comes to that. So I'll link it in the chat. I'll put it in the description of this video. This guy is very intelligent when it comes to stuff. This will give you like a really good rundown.
There's an abundance of research. There's even trans activists who agree with exactly what I'm saying. And your hormones can change, right? And even she just spoke to the fact that her bone density did not change in going on hormones and changing these things. And we can see it in sports as we're watching them. Leah Thomas is a great example.
So if you can't throw out the statistics, we're not doing enough of the work. And let's also be clear. There are some cisgender women who produce high levels of testosterone as well. And so
for sure, and they have a biological advantage as a biological woman, right? We separate the league 100 different ways, but the reality is we separate it by biology, and so that's just kind of how it is.
Oh, we really have to unpack it from all different sides here.
Can you produce statistics about the bone density of biological men and how it changes upon being on hormones and whether or not it levels out to biological women?
I actually cannot, because when I would think of those statistics, I would think it was BS, to be quite honest with you, because the reality of it is we could talk about statistics and the research all day long, but it's about experience. We're going to be looking more at the experience, because again, when we look at cisgender women who produce high levels of testosterone and who have been kicked out of sports, and been disqualified from teams based on something that they biologically cannot control, then what are we really talking about here?
I mean, biologically you can control it though as a trans person. Like you are trying to with hormones, right? So there's you know what I mean? Listen, man, I was with her up until this part, but like you're just so wrong about the sports. I don't know what else to say,
Well, we're talking about, I mean, data and that is overwhelming, and we're talking about what is also we're capable of seeing with our human eyes. I think it's very clear that if you compare maybe you to the rest of us, there is going to be a strength difference. There's going to be a bone density difference.
But you're just saying.
I mean, listen, I'm just looking, and this trans woman could probably beat the fuck out of any of these cis women. I'm not trying to be rude, because they're like a woman. I get it, like a valid, but like, yeah, there's still a maintenance of biological advantages.
That you don't know until we physically do something, and just perceiving and assuming just because I look a certain way, that's not fair. I
mean, I'm a big guy. You could just assume that like I would be able to fight somebody who's just smaller than me. Usually, like untrained, I'm gonna be stronger and more like capable than somebody that's like a fucking 5 foot tall, right? Like that's just generally how it works. Maybe not at running though. You could tell that they run faster, but you could tell that they could do something better than me, generally speaking, right?
we could look completely different or whatever, but she may be stronger than me.
I agree, but
she have much more agility and vitality than I do. We don't know that until you actually do it.
I'm saying it has been studied, it's been done.
And it's been done, we've seen it
but it's an assumption.
Time again.
But we're only going on assumption at this point. Because again,
well, no, you're not. There's like a lot of studies that have been done about it. But okay.
It's not assumption when we see it. Maybe it's the
like fundamentally, we just know that testosterone is a performance-enhancing drug. If you're born a man and you transition to a woman, you still had that testosterone go through you. Somebody who's on like tests for like 10 years and then comes off of it and just like cycles natty and like slowly loses their games, but they still maintain a significant amount of their strength. This is somebody who never did that. I mean, it's just the fact.
News cycle that I watch, but I see it a lot. I see it quite often where they're showing trans women beating. I mean, I'm by far.
And you don't see women dominating in.
There's like trans women who like in the MMA that like cracked the skull. Like one woman who like cracked the skull of another MMA fighter. Now she chose to do that, but I want to see what this thing is. There's a link here. Welcome to Spectrum. Try it out. Trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports. Strongly disagree. I'm putting that on my thing. Let's see what it says. Most of them say strongly disagree. So that's good. Cool. I wonder how you could just like what's in the computer, but yeah, cool. Well, good for them.
Men's sports, right? You don't see trans men going into men's sport and just completely dominating and wiping the field with them. This is what happens when you, in my opinion, twist God's design. And when you go against God's design, you create these problems that you wouldn't have if you weren't going against what God intended.
I'm going to take her side a little bit on that. And let me say one more thing, and I'm supporting you on this one. There's a great deal of women that, and actually there was a lady in the last Olympics that they actually disqualified until she went on androgen blockers to knock her testosterone down to.
Yeah, that part's stupid. They shouldn't have to do that. I don't know why they did that. I wonder if they thought that she was on gear or something and they couldn't prove it. I don't know why you would do that though. If she just has high test levels, good for her.
A female level. Like I said, this is not a binary yes or no question.
And if a trans woman decides to fight a cis woman, like, or the cis woman agrees to the fight, then that's different. I get that, but like, we're talking about the differences, you know what I mean?
The whole idea of messing with what God puts up, God put me up. Okay, if you want to take that,
true.
And I had this.
True, God did give them gender dysphoria. God gave them gender dysphoria, baby. God put it up. God made people gay, bro.
With a very religious man in San Diego, and he was like, "Oh, I don't quite know how to deal with that."
And God made you that way, but He didn't make a lot of the people transition.
I understand,
but God also understands my transition. God, first of all, knew what.
Well, God gave them the desire to transition, right? Yeah, God gives us a lot of desires, and we use things in society to satisfy those, I suppose.
I was going to be in my life. God already knew I was going to be trans when God put me here. So
why
I don't think
didn't
it's
He make
fair.
you
I don't think it's fair when people dib and dab. Your relationship with God is personal.
Yes.
It's sacred.
Let's
and
keep
I
it
don't
there.
think it's fair when other people dib and dab in other people's relationship with God when they don't understand what they go through. God still blesses me as a trans woman. God blesses you as a cisgendered woman. God
respect.
is embodied in me as a trans person. I don't think it's fair, again, when we judge people's personal relationship with God. Gender identity, sexual orientation, none of that matters to a God that loves all.
Gender dysphoria is real.
Yeah, of course it's real.
I think it is obviously real because many people experience it, but like any kind of dysphoria, whether it's someone who thinks they're overweight or anything, I think it should be treated as not reality. Like if I thought I was obese, I wouldn't want to go to an affirming therapist to tell me, yes, you are obese and you should, get sick.
Yeah, so she's doing a really good job of botching the argument of saying that like if you are anorexic, I wouldn't want to go to a doctor to confirm that delusion. Because if you're anorexic and you think you're fat, and the doctor's like, "Oh, well, you actually are fat. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't eat anything. You'll just die, and that's bad for you." we don't treat things when it comes to any medical anything based on the way that you see yourself. We treat things based on what the best outcome is in society without hurting society. So if an anorexic person goes to the doctor and says, hey, I'm really fat and I don't want to eat anything, and the doctor goes like, you aren't, you need significant mental health counseling, and you need to eat and not have this dysphoria, and then you would go through those things. When it comes to a trans person, right, the trans person goes to the doctor and says, hey, I'm having this issue with my gender identity, right, and they'll say, okay, like, let's put you on a doctor controlled pathway to transition to the point that makes you happy, because that'll create greater outcomes in life. That's it. Again, I have to qualify this every single time. The statistic that says that like suicidality stays the same is a dated statistic from 1970 that was based off of gender identity disorder, not gender dysphoria, that it was so overdiagnosed that upwards of 85% of people would detransition if nothing happened. If you don't have the problem anymore, if you don't do anything for a period of time, then you've never had a problem in the first place. Okay, so outcomes are greater when you transition. That's it. And it doesn't hurt society, right? People who want to bring up pedophiles, like, why don't the pedophiles rape kids? Because it's bad for kids, because they get raped if you let pedophiles rape kids, right? You understand? We go based on what's the best for the individual versus what's best for society, right? Like with something that's best for the individual that doesn't hurt society. That's how we operate any issue ever in any capacity, right? You test it on anything. Like serial killers, we don't let them kill people. It might make them happy and make them feel better, but it hurts people in society, right? Okay, that's pretty much it.
Skinnier.
Well, I had the opportunity of working on the DSM-4, I think it was, when we actually declassified transgender dysphoria from a mental illness to a condition. You know, I had been, at that point in time, I'd been cross-dressing for 50 years. And, because that dysphoria was there and every single thing I did to try to drive it away didn't work. I spent millions of dollars trying to be...
It's in the DSM-5. What are they talking about? Diagnosis for gender dysphoria is included in the DSM-5. What is the DSM-4? What the fuck is the difference? In 1990, the World Health Organization followed suit and included the release of DSM-4. And transsexualism was replaced by gender... Oh, okay, they changed it from transsexualism with gender identity disorder. Okay, gotcha.
The coolest dude in the world. You know, I bought airplanes,
bro.
Everything that I could to just show the world how masculine I was. It didn't work. It didn't go away. And I did therapy. I purposely went to a therapist that was anti-gender affirming. And literally he said, you need to do this. You know, and because it was so deep-seated. I spent 6 weeks as Gina with my son. And at the end of that period of time, he asked two very fundamental questions. The most important one was, it's got to be truly exhausting for you to lead two lives. And I was kind of like, that kind of shook me to the core that my 22-year-old son saw that better than I did. So shortly thereafter, I announced to my family that I was going to transition. My wife and I separated because of it. The kids were...
Hey, I can understand that, man. Like that's rough. You know, I can understand why the wife wouldn't want to stay, because that's huge. That's a change. That's such a fucking crazy change, man. That sucks. That sucks for both of them, you know? It's unfortunate. You know, gotta live your best life, though, unfortunately, you know what I mean?
Not necessarily shocked, but, you know, understood and have supported me quite well. And my wife has actually become a very good, you know, very warm, supporting person for me.
That's good.
Gender dysphoria almost made me kill myself.
Jesus.
And coming from Mississippi, at the time, there wasn't a lot of access to gender affirming resources, like hormones, if I wanted surgery, whatever the case may be. And a lot of us trans folks who don't have access like that, a lot of us have to do sex work to be able to afford some of these things as well. Me coming up at the age of 20, and I knew I had a serious gender dysphoria, I did things to my body that I should have went to a hospital to do. That is something that's very, very hard for people to understand. A lot of us commit suicide because of gender dysphoria. And so it hits our community a lot harder.
I do think gender dysphoria is very much real. I think the issue that's happened, especially in the space of science and research, is that we've looked at gender dysphoria and said the only source of care that we can go through is blind gender affirmation care.
But that's just not true. Like, that's just an objective, not true. Here's the reality. I've talked to a person, a therapist for trans people, and I don't know why I never uploaded it. I'm fucking like angry at myself for it. This was years ago. And this is what they told me. They said the way that we treat this, a responsible therapist will treat it, is you start by having the person come in, you accurately diagnose them, you have them, and then the first thing you consider is if they would be, their best treatment method is to do no transition at all. For some people, they were telling me that like some people that have gender dysphoria, they're better off not transitioning. That's it. It's not most of them, but it's about, again, trying to figure out what's the best for the person. So they're not actually correct about this. Says a receipt of gender-affirming interventions, especially PBs or GAHs, was associated with 6% lower odds of moderate to severe depressive symptoms and 73% of lower odds of self-harm. Oh, okay. Apparently they have a source on this. Recent affirming intervention. Okay. I want to look at, do they have this source in their thing? Because I would really like to read this source specifically. I hate when they don't put fucking sources in the description. It pisses me off so much. Oh my fucking God. So University of Washington researchers recently found that gender-affirming care for transgender and non-binary adolescents likely mitigated rates of depression and suicidality, or suicidality. In a study findings published in the the investigators reported that adolescents and young adults who received puberty blockers or gender-affirming hormones had 60% lower odds of depression, 73% of lower odds of self-harm and suicidal thoughts. We took a group of 104 people aged roughly 13 to 20, and we tracked them over a couple of years, said Aaron Coleman, a fourth-year medical student at the Washington. We gave them either puberty blockers or gender-affirming hormones based on the patient preference and parental consent, and we just tracked how their depression did. Puberty blockers are prescriptive medication that really pause natural hormone production and begins with puberty. Collins explained that the hormones used in this study include testosterone or estrogen, which are used to induce appropriately puberty consistent, blah, blah, blah. An essay, how did they compare these things? I don't understand this. How would you even begin to do this?
A recently published study involving UW schools of medicine and public health researchers found that transgender and non-binary youth who received puberty blockers or gender-affirming hormones had a lower odds of depression and suicidality compared with clinic patients who did not receive these treatments.
Depression doesn't just affect you in the moment.
Okay, so they compared them to other people with the same diagnosis?
Even after it's addressed, it leaves residual effects because there's this chunk of your life that you did not get to live. And you only get one adolescence. When that's denied to you, it's going to follow you into adulthood. We have research backing up the notion that folks who initiate gender-affirming care in adulthood do see improvements in their mental health, but it does not equal the improvements that you see in folks who got to experience a normal teenage period of their life.
The study included 104 youth between the ages of 13 and 20. Researchers found that participants who received puberty blockers or gender-affirming hormones had 60% lower odds of depression and 73% lower odds of self-harm or suicidal thoughts, compared to youth who did not receive gender-affirming medications.
Gender-affirming care is life-saving care. Gender-affirming care really helps somebody live a full and complete life that most of us get to take for granted.
Okay. I mean, listen, it doesn't seem like enough research to heavily suggest. Like, it seems like it's a start, but it doesn't seem like enough. I can see why there wouldn't be a lot yet, because it's something that's somewhat new, treating kids. And again, I'm apprehensive about it, but okay. Let's keep going, I guess.
A lot of the research shows that this is not the route to go into. And other countries that have decided to do nonpartisan research, Sweden, Finland, have decided that, yes, gender affirmation care should be an option, but it really should be the last resort when it comes to treating people who appear at clinics with gender dysphoria. You know, a lot of conservatives will deny.
So I need you to understand like where she's
decided
wrong.
That, yeah, countries that have decided gender affirmation care, and a lot of the research shows that this is not the route to go into. And other countries that have decided to do nonpartisan research, Sweden, Finland.
So this, Jesus, let's see if I can find this. I gotta fucking save it. That's the Swedish study was the study that I keep referencing. All right, this is the study that they're referencing. Okay, this is the Swedish study that they are referencing. Long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sexual reassignment surgery cohort studies in Sweden. This is the study that I'm talking to. I always like link this and everything so you can read it through it yourself. But basically, this was at a time in 1973 where gender dysphoria, it was actually gender identity disorder, it was overly diagnosed. It's a bad study that they're referencing. It's from 1973 to 2003. It's massively dated. It had like zero mental health focus when it came to this issue. A lot of people were overdiagnosed again to the point where like 85% would just go back to normal if nothing happened. That means that it wasn't correctly diagnosed. Okay, it's fucking preposterous. If you have something and then like if you do nothing, it gets better. You don't have something, right? Very simple. It's a bad statistic that they're referencing. So that's what she's talking about there, but she's wrong about her understanding of the statistic.
have decided that, yes, gender affirmation care should be an option, but it really should be the last resort when it comes to treating people who appear at clinics with gender dysphoria. You know, a lot of conservatives will deny and say, well, gender affirmation care does not make them happier. And in many cases, that is true. But there are the cases like yourselves where the gender affirmation care does make them happier.
You know, I know a lot of people that have
she just doesn't understand how like gender affirming care actually works at all. It's properly diagnosed. It's based on like, you know, your outcomes and whatnot. In some cases where people aren't properly diagnosed, obviously it's not going to go particularly well, right?
transitioned, have untransitioned. I've talked with a gentleman at a religious right convention one day, and he was sitting there screaming how Jesus got him out of his gender transition. And honestly, that was the saddest man I've ever talked to in my life. When I looked at him straight in the eyes and I said, you know, here, I don't agree with what you say, but I 100% support your right to say that. And he just literally broke down crying on the steps of the Supreme Court.
If I could interject really quickly, I do.
No, absolutely not.
I feel as though the medical profession is actually inching towards a space that is going to become unsafe for people who try to express their gender dysphoria, because now we have young children coming into clinics expressing this, who by and large, statistically, about 60 to 70% grow out of that dysphoria. But because—
Again, she's not correct. She's just not correct. Oh my God, she's referring. So okay, there's two things to this. First of all, she's referring to a study that says that people, upwards of 85% of people will grow out of it. Again, it's misdiagnosed because we misdiagnose gender identity disorder. Second of all, she might be talking about people who are considered non-binary and don't actually have a diagnosis of anything, and they might grow out of it, of course, because they never had anything in the first place, and they were either trans trending or it was a personal misdiagnosis of their own feelings. Right? We were talking about this. A lot of young women seem to be identifying as non-binary now. I think a lot of it has to do with over-sexualization and them going like distancing themselves from their sex because they associate women with like hypersexualization. She's just not right about this.
Because it's become a political issue where many activists have come in and say, no, you blindly affirm, you affirm to the furthest extent that you can, rather than going through a more comprehensive process with these children. We have what I think is a medical tragedy happening against young people in this country.
I have been sexually harassed.
Okay, so weird question, probably a lot of fetishists.
Yeah, I think in our society, it's so sexualized, everyone and everything, and I think we owe a lot of that to pornography and just media, and I think the kind of acceptance that I do see more so in the LGBT community of like, you know, sex is great and let like everyone talk about it and there's no shame and everyone's just blurting out, you know, the fact that we're perpetuating a culture that's
Where does the LGBTQ community has nothing to do with the acceptability of sex? Let's just be very explicitly clear here. Like not at all. It's our society's become very sexually driven. This has nothing to do with LGBTQ people, though. What the fuck are they on about? Okay.
Frankly, in my opinion, disgusting.
So are you talking specifically about LGBT people?
I'm talking more so just about this sexual revolution, that the more sexual you are, the more partners you have, the more open you are about your sex life and everything, the more like liberated you are. What is consent? Like people are coming out of the woodwork saying, you know, I was violated, this happened to me, but they like drove home with that person, and I'm not blaming them.
Well, yeah, you are explicitly. Holy fuck, this woman is so based. Oh, incredible. Yeah, you are explicitly blaming those people for being sexually assaulted. But okay, good on you, girl.
But I am saying those lines are being blurred because of our just flagrant disregard for any kind of actual relationship prior to the sexual encounter. And I think a lot of people are being exploited.
Like, yeah, I understand. Like, our new culture can open up a doorway for like rough interactions. Let's be real. I understand that, but that's nothing to do with gay people.
Right.
True sex positivity has been powerful. It has helped us to grow and learn about our bodies in so many ways and learn safe sex practices in so many ways. What I would blame for rape culture or for a lack of good boundaries or that kind of thing is we live in a capitalist system that has taken things like sex positivity and mangled it and repackaged it and made it a whole other thing than what it actually is.
I was sexually harassed for 5 years by a woman. It does happen because I'm pretty sure it's going to be we're men this, men that. It's hard coming from a man, but to me it was harder coming from a woman because it wasn't expected. Like I understand you're going to probably touch on that about how men are more on the predatory side or the more harassing side sometimes. But I just want to let you know that it does happen with women as well.
Okay.
All through my life, world's biggest kid in junior high school, I basically was harassed continuously for being gender nonconforming. Back then, everybody in junior high school took showers together. I basically had a permanent welt on my bottom from people snapping towels at me because, I wasn't as well endowed as I probably should be. I had, pretty good sized boy boobs and basically was just unhappy being in sports. But, it happens everywhere. I have been sexually assaulted. And it didn't work out well for any of them. It's real. Let me just put it that way. It's absolutely
That's harsh, man.
Yeah, I think it'd be hard to find a person who hasn't been sexually harassed in some way, shape, or form, whether you are male or female. I think it's an experience that we all share because we are.
Maybe. I think it's different for men versus women, depending. Like, I've been sexually harassed by a gay guy once. Kept touching my penis, and I was like, bro, stop. And then I eventually almost broke his hand. It's frustrating, but... And then all the women in my content, all the women that watch me are always sexually harassing me with their eyes. I know it. I know I'm sexy. I know you're attracted to me, girl. You like that? How's that?
Are in somewhat of a hypersexualized society, and people love to make those comments public. I am a podcaster, and I do social media for a living, so as you can imagine, the onslaught of sexual harassment is quite vast.
From a very young age, I've had this recurring nightmare of something happening to me, trying to warn people, and no one believes me. When you're not believed that you're a desirable person, and I really don't think rape has anything to do with desire, but when you're not believed in that way, when trans women are experiencing trans misogyny, we're the ones who are least believed when we are sexually assaulted.
That's probably true.
And it just feels so
Because
disempowering.
people would be like, oh, you're gross. Who would want to sexually assault you, right? But it's more of a power thing,
And so terrifying when you know that you are someone who is seen as hypersexual, as inherently sexual, as inherently predatory, and yet at the same time you're seen as someone who can be isolated and sexually assaulted and not believed.
I don't think there's anything inherently predatory about trans people. And I think oftentimes when we're talking from a conservative perspective, it gets misconstrued as viewing you as a threat. And I hope that
it's not misconstrued anything. This girl's been fairly respectful, but it is not misconstrued at all. There's just a lot of transphobia in conservative spaces, obviously. We're what are you talking about? There's no misconstruing. You have one woman that's here, it's just I just think that you're fucking delusional. Of course, it's happening everywhere. What are you talking about? It's happening. It's not nobody's misinterpreting anything. It's mainly conservatives who are not validating the trans people.
that never comes off. And I think that allegations of sexual assault, regardless of who they're coming from, should be taken seriously.
Okay, cool. Base.
Found common ground.
I think we agreed on something.
We found common ground.
Very based. All right. Cool video. Wasn't too bad. Oh, those are always fun to engage in.
I want Papa God to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.